Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Get Uncomfortable. We have a very special guest today, Greg Everett. He has coached the Olympic sport of weightlifting for almost 15 years, up to the world championship level, was a nationally competitive lifter himself, and is now an elite competitor in the tactical games. A former first responder, the author of Olympic Weightlifting, a complete guide for athletes and coaches, and other titles, and the writer, director, producer of American Weightlifting, the documentary. He currently lives in Central Oregon, and we are here to talk today about his new book, Tough, Building True Mental, Physical, and Emotional Toughness for Success and Fulfillment. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So what I wanted to start with is if you could just give us a little background on some of your achievements in weightlifting, and some of the stuff I wanted to talk about. I've heard you talk about working in bike shops before, and I believe you worked as a first responder on an ambulance. Is that correct?
Yep. Wow, weightlifting. I was definitely, or I am definitely a better coach than a lifter. I competed at the senior national championship level, top five kind of guy. Like I was never the very best. I was okay. And then I was able to compete as a master briefly before I blew my shoulder out. So Masters national champion and American record holder, which depends on how much you value that. But as a coach, though, coach lifters up to the world championship level, Pan Am medalists, national record holders, national champions. So definitely my tools were better suited for coaching than lifting. So that's what I've dedicated most of my time in the sport of weightlifting to anyway. Prior to that, yeah, I've done pretty much any job you can imagine. I worked at multiple bike shops from about age 15 on, which it can be a very fun job, obviously. But I started out, I think I was making $4.25 an hour, which was the minimum wage back then in the early 90s. I did work on an ambulance for a while in Northern California, and I had initially actually intended to kind of stay on that track, but I ran into a guy named Rob Wolf, who some of your listeners might know of, while I was up in that area, and we hit it off, and he actually asked me to partner up with the gym he was opening, and that's kind of how I steered back into that world. I had been a personal trainer earlier, like age 18, and wasn't really well suited for me, but that was the mid to late 90s, and there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity like there is now, outside of personal training and professional and semi-professional strength coaching. There wasn't this in-between stuff that the CrossFit world kind of created. So that's essentially the roundabout way I ended up here as a weightlifting coach who can actually earn a living coaching the sport of weightlifting.
That is awesome. I always love hearing everybody's story and what they've gone through to get to where they are currently. And I've actually watched a ton of your videos, leading up to this. So when I got the email that, hey, I might be able to talk to him, I was like, oh, this is crazy. I love this so much. So thank you for all the content you put out. I love it. So the thing that I think is different now, so I know, did you and Rob start a gym together?
So Rob actually started the original CrossFit affiliate gym. And when I say original, I mean they're the ones who gave the Glassmans the idea to have affiliate gyms. That's how early this was. He and Dave Warner and Nick Nibbler up in Seattle. Shortly after that, he moved down to Chico, which is in Northern California, and opened a CrossFit gym basically in the back, quarter of a BJJ studio. And I met him very shortly thereafter and became his partner in the gym. It was three of us, Rob, his now wife, Nikki, and me. We're all third owners. And so that was the fourth CrossFit affiliate gym in the world. So this is people who are in the CrossFit world now, like really don't have a sense of what it was like in, 2003, 2004. You open a CrossFit gym now, you have instant brand recognition. You essentially have instant clientele. Rob and Nikki and I both worked 1 to 2 additional jobs in addition to, running the gym. And, we were there from like 5, 6 a.m. to 6, 7 p.m. at night. Like it was rough. We were begging people to train with us because no one knew what CrossFit was. They all thought it was really silly. It looked goofy. And they sure weren't willing to pay what is now like, it's still far less than what most CrossFit gyms pay. That value didn't exist yet. So it was an interesting time.
Yeah, that is such a different landscape than today. So I worked right after college. I got an internship at a CrossFit gym in Gretna, Nebraska. It's CrossFit Kinesis. And that taught me so much, just seeing, and I'd worked at other gyms in Hastings, my hometown, up until then, just doing internships and then getting paid positions, just working through that. But that whole landscape of having that affiliate opened up the door and the opportunity for me to open my current facility. I don't have a CrossFit gym. I mostly we do BJJ and we do nutrition consultation and personal training. But that whole route allowed me to get here. So thank you for the early work to allowing people to like to do that. So
it's our pleasure now. It was not that pleasant at the time.
Yes, which I think is going to tie into the book and how we can use some of the stuff in the book that you wrote to move us forward. So the show, I called it, when I was thinking of a name, I ran through about 100 different names, and I'm terrible at like just pulling the trigger, but I decided on one. And the point of the show, Get Uncomfortable, is not to just advocate a general sense of uneasiness for no apparent reason. The point of getting uncomfortable in my mind is to help inoculate ourselves against stress or fear. And to prepare as best we can for if or when the shit hits the fan. So in your new book, you talk about what toughness truly is. So I was hoping you could just kind of tell people what your definition of true toughness is, and who this book is for.
Well, to the second question first, my answer is the thing that all publishers, editors, and English teachers absolutely hate. It's for everyone. And I say that somewhat facetiously, but it really is true. And I think that was the difficulty, the dilemma with the title, of course, is that's very off-putting to a large segment of the population based on what they believe that word to mean. Or they think that this just doesn't apply to them. That, I don't need to get tough. I just need to work on these other, self-help things towards success. And that's really what the book is about ultimately. So that being said, the way I break down toughness is essentially the combination of four interdependent elements. First being character, and that is who we are. What is our identity? And of course, along with that is what are our values? What's important to us? What's meaningful? What are the things that are driving what we do, what we say, how we behave, the way we kind of interpret the world? And then tied to that closely and equally critically is our security in that identity. And having that trust in who we are so that we are able to avoid all the needless, attention seeking and kind of desperate need for validation from other people, or needing to be constantly reminded of our value, and these sorts of things really frees us to pursue what is important to us and to live life as we see fit. The second is capability. And this is not just physical ability. This is skills. This is knowledge and understanding. And this is experience. All those things. The easiest way to think of it is a toolbox. And so we're trying to collect as many tools as possible and gain as much experience with those tools in as many different situations as possible, so that we are as prepared as we can possibly be for any, unpredictable situation that we encounter, to not just survive it, but to get through it successfully and come out the other end better. The third, very closely tied, of course, is capacity. And this is what most people consider resilience, but I look at this as kind of resilience plus, right? So resilience really is just the ability to return to our original condition following some kind of, trauma or adversity. And that's, to me, a good start, but it's not quite good enough. I want to exploit those situations, that adversity, the hardship, the challenges, in every way possible to our advantage. So I don't want to just return to my original condition. I want to come out the other end of that stronger, smarter, more engaged with the world, more experienced, more eager to, learn and participate in all these different things, so that I can, again, become better and better prepared in the future. And then finally is commitment. And this is the one that essentially ties the previous three together. This is where we have, discipline, routine, habit. But really, this is the action, right? This is what transforms those previous three from kind of stories we tell ourselves about who we are, or these private fantasies we have about who we are, and it turns them into reality. So this is, I believe this is who I am and what's important to me. The commitment side of things is what actually is us taking the steps, performing the behaviors and actions, speaking the ways that support, what we believe about ourselves.
That's beautiful. It's so, when I was reading the book, when somebody asked me like, hey, what's your show about? I am just going to give them this book. I'm just going to be like, this is exactly what I'm trying to get across, and it's very well stated. So yeah, I love it so I remember when I went to my first CrossFit seminar, my level 1, and they had definitions of fitness and things like that. And before, I was just kind of in the world, I went and got my bachelor's degree in exercise science, and then it's like, okay, fitness is kind of this and it's kind of that, but they had specific definitions of each thing explicitly laid out, and that just resonated with me so much. So it's like exactly what you did in this book. You made it so clear for what everything is, and you have action steps at the end of each chapter, almost each chapter, and I was just like, this is perfect. This gives people a place to not only take in a bunch of philosophy, but it gives them an opportunity to put it into action, to use it in their life. So I'm just going to kind of go through the 4 C's here a little bit and ask some questions about them. So in the part on character, this is one thing that stuck out to me. In the book, I read that we get to choose who we think we are. So we get to choose our identity. But the important thing is the actions we take on a daily basis to solidify our identity. That doesn't happen on accident. So that brings me to figuring out who you are. You have to know yourself. Why is it so important to know yourself?
Because ultimately, who we are is what is determining every single thing we do. So, you hear people say like, oh, well, such and such that's so out of character for him. Why would he do that? Well, if he did it, it's not out of character. The issue is that you don't know the true character of that person. So, our character identity includes our values, which is what our motivations come from. We don't do anything arbitrarily in our lives. We may not understand why we're doing it, but there is an underlying motivation for it that is tied to who we are and what we value. So when we know what those things are, when we understand that, now we understand why we respond to things the way we do. And that also gives us even more control over determining whether or not we're going to allow that to continue, or if we are going to change it, because we can't simply change our behavior without changing who we are. And, of course, conversely, we can't change who we are without changing our behavior. They're one and the same, essentially. So once we can really sit down, and this, of course, is a process that occurs over a long period of time. It's not a quick thing we're going to do, tomorrow and then have it all sorted out. When we understand who we are, why we do what we do, we can then take control of the way we are thinking, the way we are responding to things, the way we interpret events, and therefore the way we experience life and the way we interact with it and other people. Because without that understanding, again, we're essentially going through life, and our actions are based more on inertia or on outside forces kind of influencing us, versus this is who I am. This is what's important to me. And now these are the things I have to do in order to keep everything harmonious and move me in the path or in the direction I want to go to achieve the things that are most important to me.
I love that. I love being intentional about who you are and where you're trying to go, and why that is so important, because I've seen so many situations where somebody will overreact to something that's small that they took as a personal attack on them, because they're not secure in who they are and their identity. So they're assuming that they're being attacked. But from a vantage point of one step back, I could clearly see like, okay, that's not what that was. That's not what they were trying to do. But now you're overreacting. You've caused a situation and a rift potentially between somebody and ruined a relationship when it wasn't necessary. So I think that is super useful to be able to know who you are, and no, this is not an attack on me. It's not a reflection on me. I love that.
Well, and that's a classic misinterpretation of toughness too, is that there's this compulsion or this expectation that you have to confront every single person, for every slight or perceived slight, as you say. And as you get more and more into the stuff, you realize that it's quite the opposite. I mean, the ability to, like you said, recognize what exactly is happening, whether or not there is any sort of legitimate threat, and therefore any kind of need for a response is critical. And if you know who you are and you're secure in who you are, you're not desperately, seeking approval and validation. So you don't have to show everybody in the bar or at the ball game or whatever that you're the big, tough, strong guy because someone bumped you a little bit accidentally in a really crowded walkway. You know what I mean? Hey, it's a crowded walkway. It's hard to avoid people. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go drink my beer and watch the game. And it's like, when you've gotten to that point, your life becomes much more enjoyable, right? You're not constantly on high alert, imagining the whole world is out to get you. And, every single moderately attractive person around you is watching every single thing you do and judging your value based on, whether or not you had the classic tough guy response. It's just silly. It frees you up to actually be a full-grown adult. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's liberating. I wish I would have learned that lesson a little bit sooner.
Most of us do.
Yeah. So no, I it's completely liberating. You're not worried about what everybody else is looking at you. So I really think that is a beneficial mindset to adopt for anyone, really. So when it comes to knowing yourself and being introspective and reflecting on potentially traumatic events or challenging situations, what are some of the methods that you have used personally or you've seen maybe athletes use to facilitate this process and move along the gradient of toughness? I know in the book you talk about the journaling process, and I love that process. So if you want to talk about that a little bit too, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, the journaling thing is really huge, because that is, ultimately what we need is this continuous self-awareness and self-evaluation and assessment, and then appropriate response to, what we learn, right? So if we, put the journaling process in place, that is a really simple and effective way to make that happen, right? So every single day we have this routine. I recommend in the morning, and I explain that in great detail in the book why. But that allows us to participate in that self-assessment and, making the adjustments day to day to our character, our ways of thinking, the way that we, handle emotion outwardly and inwardly, so that it becomes a process that is built into our lives versus this thing that we only do when something really dramatic happens to force us to do it, in which case we've usually missed an opportunity or something has occurred that we now have to spend the next 10 years regretting, or, whatever the case is. So really, with athletes or anybody else, learning to be totally aware of what is happening around you objectively, but then also how you are naturally responding. How am I interpreting this? And am I coloring this objective experience with ridiculous, kind of like latent emotional stuff that is tied to totally unrelated things that I haven't resolved yet? Like, the classic example I give is, a married couple arguing about, putting the spoon in the wrong place in the drawer. It's like, well, you're probably not really that mad about the spoon being in the drawer, one slot farther over than you'd prefer. What are you actually upset about? And maybe you need to figure that out so that you're not chewing your wife or your husband out over something stupid like a spoon. And so, always having that awareness. So looking at the journal, looking back at the previous day, well, what happened in this day? What did I do well? When I saw that my wife had put the spoon away in the drawer in the place that I hate, did I flip out and yell at her? Or did I look down at the spoon, move the spoon, and then move on with my life, because who cares? It's a spoon. Or if I did flip out, what am I going to do about it next time? What are the strategies I can implement? Am I going to take 10 deep breaths? Am I going to do the Thomas Jefferson count to 10 before I say anything? What do I have to sit down and have a full-blown meditation session because I'm such a hothead? Whatever the case is, you are not just able to, but really encouraged to take these action steps, these practical things, and implement them into your life so that they become more and more part of your nature and require less and less conscious action on your part, right? So that you may tell yourself, don't freak out, count to 10, watch what you say and how you say it. And over time, if you're doing that, it becomes natural that you don't overreact and act like an idiot and say or do things that you regret for no good reason.
Those are fantastic coping strategies. I say lucky. My wife is a licensed mental health practitioner, so she made me start working on all of these things when I was like 16. When we got together in high school. So she has kept me on track. Why did you say that? Why did you do that? When you feel this way, are you aware that you're reacting this way? Or you're going in I used to have these cycles. So I lost my mother when I was 15, and I would have these cycles around the year where certain times of the year when it got close to when the event happened in spring, I would go through these emotional roller coasters. And I wasn't even aware of it. And she finally sat down after being with me for a couple of years and was like, do you recognize that every year around this time it happens? And I was like, no, I didn't even know that I was acting this way, but I feel upset and I'm being an asshole to everybody. And when she said that, just being able to put my finger on what probably was causing it, allowed me to get rid of some of the feeling. I was like, okay, I'm able to process this now and I'm aware of it. And meditation has been super useful. So a lot of what you're saying sounds reminiscent to me, and you even mention it in the book, I think, of Stoic philosophy of not painting everything with emotion and looking at it objectively. And it's almost a little bit like the Buddhist tenet of detachment, not wanting something to be a certain way, or if you do, recognizing that and trying to lessen the desire of that. I love that. I love the Stoics, and I've studied Buddhism for a while just through college and then afterwards. Just it's interesting to me. And I think it's useful. So now,
and you are really lucky that you had someone in your life who was able to kind of draw your attention to that and kind of guide you through that recognition. And so for people who do not have that situation or who are very introverted and really have to solve problems on their own, which I tend to be more of that type. That's why a journaling situation is so important, is because you can end up having what effectively is a dialogue, even though it's with yourself. So rather than having that person who is like, hey, look at what you're doing, and asking you those prompting questions that get you focused on what's happening and how to do it, you're doing that for yourself. And it's hugely effective. That's one of the things I've gotten the best feedback on in the book is people who've actually tried it and they're like, this is literally life-changing. I feel noticeably better within days of starting this.
There's no question. It's something that I do every day. I picked it up along the way, and I love doing it. And the fact that I did not expect that to be in this book, to be honest with you, when
misleading title.
But I think it's perfect because it's going to draw on a certain person and probably the type of person who might be a little bit squeamish about doing this process, and it's going to open them up to a process that's going to be super beneficial. Do you remember any of I'm sure you do, the prompts, just a couple of the prompts that you might have in the journal that you would use?
Yeah, so there's 3 prompts. The first one is starting with listing things that you're grateful for, and this is a really common thing in journaling and kind of just mental health in general, right? And it is so critical, and actually there's been research that shows that it physically changes the chemistry in your brain. This act of focusing on gratitude. And so we start there. It creates a more, fertile mental environment for the subsequent things. But it's also really critical because we get so consumed with the negative day to day. Just it's a human nature, as far as I can tell. We are so overwhelmed by the negative that it's very easy for us to forget all the wonderful things in our lives. And that's a great way to find yourself in a position where you're just kind of wallowing in your own misery and unable to move forward and move past certain things. And so by beginning that exercise by saying, hey, here's not only three things I'm grateful for, but why am I grateful for them? And forcing you to really dig into it and say, well, it's easy to say, I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful that I have a job. That's easy. It's rote. It's not, it's moderately effective, but you can make it better by saying, I'm grateful for my family because, they provide meaning to my life. They provide me a sense of purpose, and really getting an understanding why. Like, why is this so important? Or, if that were absent in my life, what would change? Things like that, and really forces you to look at, as many different things as possible, even the most minor stuff. Like, I've written ridiculous shit like, I'm grateful for the mornings when I come outside and it's 20 degrees, but it's sunny and crystal blue sky, because I just love that weather. The next one we move on to is what I kind of talked about earlier, is looking at the previous day and looking at, what did I do well? What did I not do well, and why, and how am I going to fix that? And I like this, the day after, because it allows kind of that emotional cloud that tends to linger over our experiences to dissipate a little bit. The classic advice of sleep on it is a really effective thing, right? We need time to process that stuff, often unconsciously, before we can really take an objective look at things. So we're not making rash decisions or emotional decisions or judgments. And so that allows me to say, hey, yesterday I encountered this situation and I really regret the way I reacted. This is why I reacted that way. And today, this is what I'm going to do in a practical sense to avoid that from happening again. And so you start building that practice of self-awareness and appropriate response versus, self-awareness is good, but you have to actually do something in response. Like, if you're just aware that you react poorly to situations and you never change it, there's no point in being aware of it, right? So, like, if your wife had said, hey, are you aware this happens? And you're like, yeah, and then continue to do it for the rest of your life, what's the point? Right. It's almost worse, because now you're like, wow, I feel guilty because I treat people poorly around this time of year, but I'm not going to do anything about it. So it's better off, ignorance is bliss, as they say, for you. For the rest of us, it's a pain in the ass, right? But and then finally, the last exercise is basically looking at that current day and saying, who am I? What is this day going to look like? And this is where I think the New Agers call it manifesting. I don't know, where you're basically determining, this is who I am. And I define that by, this is what I do. This is how I think about myself and the world around me, and kind of essentially writing your story for that day so that you have these expectations and kind of guidance. But it's also, on a deeper level, it's creating that belief in your mind at a subconscious level, so that you are more apt to naturally follow through on these things. Because if you believe that this is who you are and what's happening, that's essentially what your body puts out physically, versus having to constantly fight yourself. Like, this is who I am, but I'm going to, be super adversarial and try to combat that. And it doesn't work. I think it was, God, what's his name? Emil Coué, who's the guy who wrote Auto-Suggestion for Mental Mastery or whatever. Basically the guy who introduced the world to this idea of auto-suggestion. He said, in a battle of will versus imagination, imagination will always win. So in other words, what we believe will always win over our discipline or our willpower. So we can't will things in opposition to what we believe, right? We have to change the belief so that our behavior can actually occur.
Okay, I am going to put a link to that in the show notes after this, and I'm going to get that book. I
reference that in the in this book, Tough, and I'm pretty sure you can get that thing as a free PDF.
Oh, okay. That's fantastic. I love it. The next thing I was going to cover was the universal basics of capability. I love that you put this in at the end of the book. I think it's a great place for people to start. I think that because I found myself at one point in my life, it was probably during college, I had realized, like, okay, I can change a tire, but I don't know how to change my oil. I don't really have any survival skills. I've never used a firearm before. I don't know anything about first aid. I'm still not super up to snuff on first aid, but I'm just going to run through the list here really quick so people can hear it. The list goes survival skills, first aid, home safety, car skills, tool use, self-defense, physical ability, and firearms. I think that is a great list for someone to start being capable. So in your opinion, why is capability so important? Why was it a part of this book?
This is how we get through situations that we can't control and can't predict, right? Is the bigger our toolbox, the more tools we have, the more experience we have using each of those tools in novel situations, the better prepared we are to handle whatever we encounter, right? So if we have one of those like silly grocery store toolkits, it's got like a half of a screwdriver and a hammer that's so small and light, like you can't even pound in a finished nail into drywall. It's pointless. We're not going to get really far. Like when we encounter a tough situation, there's only so much we can do, and we're kind of left waiting, hoping, expecting somebody else to come solve the problem for us, which is a fine strategy when you're 7 years old and you have mom and dad to come fix everything for you. But as an adult, we need that self-reliance and independence in order to actually get through life in a way that allows us to experience it more meaningfully. We should never, as adults, be so incapable that we are terrified of trying new things or getting out there and experiencing things because the risk is so great. That the risk doesn't have to be that great. So for example, if you know absolutely nothing about automobiles, like you cannot change a flat, you can't put, water or fluid in your radiator when your car is getting too hot, you're not going to take a road trip across the country that is going through, I broke down in Quartzsite, Arizona one time in the late 90s, which is basically a gas station and a Chinese restaurant. That's the whole town. And my thermostat exploded, my truck overheated. And, I looked around and I was like, I'm literally in the middle of the desert on Highway 10. Like if someone doesn't drive by, like this is a real big problem. And so it's like by having this collection of capabilities that often seem unrelated or silly, like, well, I don't own a gun, so why should I know anything about firearms? You are eliminating so much of the intimidation and that sense of being overwhelmed and afraid and anxious about experiences that are new to you and that often that you can't avoid. So like the firearm thing is a good one. I'm glad you mentioned that because you don't have to like guns. You don't have to own a gun. You don't have to ever deal with guns. But people who never touch a firearm tend to be scared to death of them. And when you have a little bit of experience and you get a basic understanding of how they function, and you've used them a few times, suddenly that intimidation goes away and you recognize, hey, this is a tool. I can choose what to do with it. I can choose to not bother with it. I don't have to own one. I don't have to like it. I don't have to think that, everyone should be allowed to have, RPGs and ARs or whatever. Like you can have your own beliefs on that stuff. But let's say you're in a situation and suddenly your lack of intimidation or lack of fear of a firearm and basic level of confidence allows you to save your child's life. It's pretty valuable to me, right? Versus being in that same situation and like, holy shit, I don't even want to touch that thing. I don't know, it's going to explode in my hand. And so that's obviously a very specific example, but that's the whole point, is that by gaining more experience and having this fundamental set of capabilities, you are opening yourself up to so many more possibilities in life and to gain more experiences. And experience is where you find meaning and purpose, right? You can't just sit at home on the couch and be like, what's the purpose of my life? What is meaningful to me? You don't know because you haven't experienced anything, right?
Yeah, you can't live a life without doing something. Like even sitting on the couch and doing nothing is doing something technically. So you have to do something. I just went through this exact process that you just explained with firearms in the last probably 3 or 4 years. So grew up, nobody hunted in my family, nobody had guns. Mom and dad never talked to me about it. And I remember thinking, I don't want a gun in the house because I might shoot myself or something, like because I didn't understand how they worked. Luckily, I have good friends who are into this and were able to walk me through the process and take me out for the first time and show me. And I've gotten so much more comfortable with firearms. I mean, they're awesome. I think they're awesome. I love them. They're fun. I think they're cool when you know how to use them and you can use them properly and responsibly. They're awesome. There's so many different kinds, and you can kind of like change things. And the actual skill of shooting itself, I find to be almost meditative when you're really practicing. If you're shooting long range or if you're doing pistol work, I have enjoyed it thoroughly, and it's going to be, I think, a part of my life for the rest of my life. And I plan on teaching my kids about it. I have one daughter now, so just the new skill acquisition I find so important in your life, because you can transfer those skills to your kids. You can teach them to your kids. You can, it's shifted my paradigm on life, because before I had a kid, it was just me, right? Me and my wife. Right. And now that I have a kid, it's like, I want to help them be prepared so they're not so reliant on everybody else. Just like you say in the book, it is mom and dad for a while, but then we just disperse our reliance across more people. This guy does the air conditioning. This guy does the sheetrock. This guy does the car work. It's the same thing. It's just you're paying more for it, and there's more people, so you don't feel that lack of ability because you can disperse it. But I think it's so important to have that new skill acquisition. And I just got done with the last episode that we did talking about swimming. So we're trying to do a triathlon, me and my buddy are, and he was a collegiate swimmer. I've never swam. I never took swimming lessons. And showing up to the pool, I was doing stuff that like small children would do, holding onto the side of the wall and kicking the feet. I just felt like an idiot. And I was like, it doesn't matter if anybody's looking at me or laughing, I don't care, because I'm going to have this skill and I'm going to become very proficient at it. And I'm going to teach my own kid how to swim. She's not going to go through this.
Right. But see, that attitude you have right there is so uncommon, especially for men who tend to have this sense that they have to project this persona of competence and expertise and physical ability at all times. Like they cannot show any kind of potential vulnerability or weakness. And it's so self-limiting, right? So you think, okay, well, I've never swam before, so I'm too embarrassed to go to a pool and do the little kid stuff where everyone's looking at me. That's how humiliating. Okay, well, so now you're risking for the rest of your life, risking drowning by just going to a friend's pool or, going boating or whatever. Like, that is such a bad trade.
Yep.
10 minutes of maybe some embarrassment versus a lifetime of security and comfort and fun, right? And so that's the way you have to look at this stuff is, not only that skill itself that you've acquired, but you are chipping away at that anxiety and intimidation and fear of embarrassment with every single one of these experiences you do, because now you're like, hey, I did the swimming thing. Yeah, it was a little embarrassing for a minute, but look, I survived. Everything was fine. Like I'm not getting beat up and bullied, getting dunked in trash cans for it. Like my life is better for it. So now the next thing that you encounter where you're like, hey, I have no idea how to do this stuff, but I'm going to go ahead and learn it because I'm curious and I want to acquire the skill. And I don't care if, some stranger that I'm probably never going to see again anyway thinks it's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of wired into us to care about what other people think about, but that is debilitating for some people. And now I can swim, and it's awesome, and it's fun, and it's a skill that is, I'm not going to drown now. Like if somebody kicks me out of a boat or I fall out of a boat in the middle of the ocean or the lake or something, we only have lakes in Nebraska. We don't have any big bodies of water. So I can swim back to the shore here. But that's the same thing I did with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, starting doing that. I didn't have any background in that. And then we actually got a good group of guys going here in town that showed up. One of them was on a national championship wrestling team. The other one was a state champion in his high school. And we just found this group of guys, and we started doing wrestling. And I remember the first wrestling practice, I put on my wrestling shoes, and I was like, I'm going to look like an idiot again. But I start telling myself, like, you should be excited to suck at something, especially something that is going to have a great return on investment. Like all the time I put into the mats or to swimming or to shooting, like you said, is going to pay off in so much. Like one, I enjoy it. Two, if the situation arises that I need to protect my family, I need to swim, or something is happening on the street where I need to try to mitigate that situation, I can do that. And I feel so much more confident in myself. I noticed a shift in my mindset. You don't do that puffing and that posturing anymore. I don't feel like I need to.
Right.
Because it's like, it's fine. It's fine. I've been here. It's
Yeah.
practice.
Right. And that, you know, I think the capability thing too is you get a bit far afield. You start telling people, hey, you should know how to start a fire. Like, okay, you know, this is just getting silly. I'm never going to be out in the wilderness or whatever. I remember reading a book about a woman who went on a plane ride through the southeastern Sierra Nevada with a couple friends. They were just going to go do a quick hop from San Francisco over to Palm Springs, take some photos, and then come back. Guess what? That plane crashed trying to pass over in the Mount Whitney area. Her two friends died. She was there alone on top of a mountain and had to survive. So it's like, this is why it's adversity. It's unexpected. You can't plan for it. So to write things off as saying, I'll never need that, you're just taking a huge gamble with your life, your safety, your family's safety, your friend's safety, whatever. It is so much better to have knowledge and skills that you end up not needing than to need knowledge and skills that you don't have. Like, you're not going to lie in your deathbed going, God, I wish I didn't know all of this stuff. It's just stupid. Instead, you're going to be on, you know, a 13,000 foot mountain peak going, man, I'm freezing and I'm starving. I wish I knew how to take care of this. Right. So it's like one of those paths is very, very sensible. And the other one is just kind of lazy.
Yeah. Laziness. I think that's a large issue that we're dealing with a lot of people. I every time I fly anywhere, I have a bag in my pack always with duct tape, scissors, you know, fishing hooks, a snare, some, you know, you name it, an emergency blanket, the waterproof matches, maybe a lighter. I just always have that. And my wife always gives me shit about it. She's like, why do you got to bring that? And I'm like, in case the plane crashes. Like, you're going to be glad that I brought it. I hope the plane doesn't crash. I hope I'm training skills that I never have to use, but I enjoy learning about them. And if I do need them, boy, everybody's going to be happy that I took the time to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Not making fun of me now, are you?
Yeah, exactly. You're freezing it. You can't have any of my fire. Go across the mountain.
Exactly.
So I think this ties in really well to capacity. There was a quote you had in your book: "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. The experience of suffering alone doesn't inexorably produce strength. We must choose to act in response to that suffering to gain from it." So how can people listening or watching this learn to respond to adversity or use challenging situations where they're uncomfortable? Maybe it's like carrying a 200-pound sandbag. Do you feel like throwing up on yourself? Or maybe they're in an ice bath. Or something bad happens like with the year 2020 and this year so far, where they get their business shut down. They're not able to go to work. They get really sick. Someone dies. How can they build themselves up better than before? And how to incorporate those lessons from that, like in a positive way, and not be psychologically wrecked at the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is really crucial. You first and foremost have to be able to recognize and accept objective reality. Like we cannot, so many people look at this kind of stuff and their approach is to say, everything's okay. This isn't a problem. Everything's fine. That's not a good way to go about it. Like, you cannot pretend that what is happening is not happening. That is not solving any problem. It's not helping you. That's setting you up for failure. So you have to say, hey, this is a problem. My business shut down, or, you know, my car broke down on Highway 10, you know, hundreds of miles between LA and Phoenix. Like, there's nothing out here. What am I going to do about it? And so that's the thing, is once you accept that reality, then you can start framing the situation as a problem, and problems can be solved, right? So you start implementing practical things like, all right, I'm gonna dig through my toolbox, my previous experiences. I'm gonna rely on my creativity, my ingenuity, my resourcefulness, the confidence that I've developed over the years of you know, learning new things, trying new things, and succeeding. And I'm going to find a way to, if not totally solve this problem. You can't just magically put your business back online, depending on the circumstances. But what can you do within those new circumstances to take advantage of it, right? So you said that with the gym shut down, sorry, I'm mixing up a podcast I did before this one. But let's say your gym shuts down from the pandemic. Well, you can just throw in the towel and be like, well, we're screwed. Now I got to pay rent on this place for the next 6 months. I got no income. Or maybe you can rent out your equipment and provide, daily workouts to all your clients online so that they'll keep their memberships so that you do have that income, even though the gym is closed. You can go do, workouts in the park possibly, so how can you change what you're doing within the restraints of these new circumstances in order to continue to thrive, or at the very least to survive until this thing runs its course, and then take everything you've learned from it to thrive in the wake of it, right? So it may not be within that actual time frame. It could be the most miserable, difficult experience you will ever have. But afterward, the question is, what can you take from it? What did you learn from it? So the quote you read there, the Nietzsche quote, it's kind of a double whammy there, because I was talking about in one part of the book, Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who was imprisoned in a concentration camp in World War II. And he was quoting Nietzsche in his book about the experience, and basically saying, we're in this immutable situation. We cannot escape. We cannot change the fact that we're starving to death, that we're being murdered, that we're being treated, worse than cattle. But what we can change is how we experience it on a mental, emotional, spiritual level. And so he was making the point that, the way, I'm going to try to quote him, and it's not going to be accurate, but basically the way that they bore their suffering was itself, a spiritual freedom. In other words, people who were in this just awful, horrific situation, there was nothing they could do physically to change it. They decided, I can be beaten by this, spiritually, emotionally, whatever, or I can say, what can I learn from this? And, Frankl, talks about how he would control what he can control. So he would get this, a tiny little piece of bread to eat that day. He would break a piece of it off and give it to someone else. And it's like, that's not helping nourish him and keep him alive, but it was this thing that he could control, and his value, who he was. It was so important to him to be a contributor and to help other people that he maintained his freedom and his sense of self in this ridiculously god-awful situation by this one little gesture. And so the point of that being that no matter how bad the situation gets, there's always something we can choose to do in response, during it, after it, to make it better for ourselves, to make it that it's not this wasted experience and it's just misery and torture. And we can come out a better person on the other side. He ended up writing this incredible book that, who knows how many copies it sold, but it's one of the most impactful books that you can read. And so even if that alone was all he had accomplished, which it wasn't, that would be enormously, just a huge contribution to the world and to his own sense of, success and fulfillment and achievement.
Man. Yeah, I feel that's a good place to end this on. That was like a perfect, that was a perfect ending. That is such a good book. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's just mind blowing how someone's perspective about something, even if it's reflective, right? If it's after the fact, being able to frame that in a way that you can use it is something that I think anybody can use. It takes practice, I would say, or being aware of the process. But no, I think that's a fantastic sentiment to end this on. So, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Can you tell us where people can find more about you if they're interested? Anything that you would like us to know?
Sure. You can get the book essentially on any retailer. It's in hardcover, ebook, all the ebook formats, and audiobook on essentially every platform. BecomingTough.com has some excerpts. It has some links to other podcasts, radio stuff I've done if you need more persuading. And then at Becoming Tough on Instagram, I post things, excerpts and quotes and things like that, if you like kind of engaging with that stuff. And then Instagram at Catalyst Athletics is my main account. So that's everything I'm up to and all that fun stuff, including the weightlifting.
Okay. And I love the fact that you read the audiobook. That is always a big perk in my mind. So thank you for doing that.
I hate audiobooks. I hate audiobook narrators. They drive me nuts. They talk so slowly and it's so awkward and weird. So like, there's no way I'm going to let that happen.
Yeah, more power to you. I love it. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Get Uncomfortable. I hope you found some value in this one. This was a really good one. Go out and get Greg's book. It's called Tough. So look that up. The audiobook is really good as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next Thursday.